this is Layla. In today's video, we're going to make a comparison between bacteria and viruses. And the comparison is going to be on the structure, the size, the shapes of each one of them, the ways of infection, and the most common diseases found. Okay, let's begin with talking about bacteria. So basically, bacteria is the most common example of prokaryotic cells. So let me just give you a brief introduction about what are prokaryotic cells. Basically, they are cells that are known to be very small in size and they have very, very simple structure. And when I say simple structure, I mean that they have literally no nucleus. They just have a circular DNA or chromosome swimming around in cytoplasm. But come on, let's be honest. The first thing that pops into your head when you hear the word bacteria is that they're all bad, which actually is not true. Because the truth is, most bacteria is actually good for you. It's only a small percentage that can be harmful. And the fact that bacteria is found everywhere around us is actually an advantage for us, because the bacteria that are found in and on your body, which is called the normal flora, are very, very important for you. This is because normal flora compete with harmful bacteria and prevent them from causing diseases. Okay, now let's get talking a little bit about the structure of bacteria. But I want you to pay full attention because it gets confusing here, even though it's simple, but I just want you to not get lost. So yeah, let's get talking about it. So the first thing that we're going to mention in bacteria is the chromosomes, which basically holds the genetic material of the bacterium. And as you can observe in this picture, there is big difference between the chromosomes in eukaryotes and the chromosomes in prokaryotes. And as you can see, the chromosomes in prokaryotes are basically one large central chromosome in an area called nucleoid. That's it. However, many prokaryotes have a smaller piece of DNA which also has a circular arrangement which is called a plasmid. Now we're done with the chromosome, moving on to the next part. Before I mention what's the next thing, I just want you to know that most bacteria have only two layers, which are basically the cell membrane and the cell wall. But some prokaryotes have an extra layer which is called a capsule. Okay, now capsules have a lot of functions, okay? The first one is they prevent cells from dying out and being engulfed by white blood cells. They also help cells attach to their environment, and they shelter cells from the effects of antibiotics. So as we can see, the capsule, which is basically a layer of polysaccharides, is the outermost layer surrounding the bacterium, and not all bacteria have a capsule. The next layer coming is the cell wall. So now that we're talking about the cell walls, let me bring this up. Scientists also classify bacteria according to the composition of their cell walls. What does that mean? Basically, some bacterium, they have their cells which contain, instead of only one layer of lipid, they have two, which is basically an extra amount in peptoglycan. Okay, so they classify that, or they find out whether they do or not, using a technique or an experiment called gram stain. So after a bacterium is stained, if it appears dark purple, that means that they have an extra amount of peptoglycan, and this is called gram-positive. The opposite, which is basically if it appears as pink, that means it has less peptoglycan and it's gram-negative. Now you're probably wondering, what is the point of doing so? So the thing is that some antibiotics work by attacking the cell wall. So basically, physicians need to know the type of the cell wall so that they can choose the right, proper antibiotic. Otherwise, it would literally be no use of taking an antibiotic in the first place. And then finally, the innermost layer is the plasma membrane. The next thing we have is a hair-like structures surrounding a bacterium, which are called the pili. So this pili is made of protein, and it serves as a bridge, so copies of plasmids can be transferred through bacteria cells by this pili, which causes new genetic characteristics. Then we have the ribosomes, which we all know has many functions according to which type we're talking about, but mainly it helps in protein synthesis in bacteria. So finally, with the flagella, which is made of filaments, and it helps in the movement of bacteria. Now we all know that the size of bacteria is very tiny, but to be more specific, it's only 1 to 10 micrometers long and 0.7 to 1.5 micrometers wide. I'm pretty sure that's very small. Now let's start talking about the shapes of prokaryotes, which are generally three main shapes. The first ones are the spherical shape, which are called the cocci. The second ones are the rod-shaped ones, which are called the bacilli, and the final ones are called spirochetes, which from their names are spiral. Now let's talk a little bit about the little percentage of harmful bacteria. Now, disease-causing bacteria can affect you in one of two ways. The first way is that some bacteria multiply quickly at the site of infection before the body's defense systems can destroy them. Another case is that bacteria secrete a toxin or another substance that might cause harm to the other cells. Now let's mention some of the human bacterial diseases. The first one I have is the pneumonia, which is a type of respiratory disease. Another disease which is from the respiratory diseases is the tuberculosis, which is very common between us. And then for the skin diseases, we can have the acne. Then finally, for the digestive tract diseases, we have the gastroenteritis. The diseases I just mentioned are only some of many human bacterial diseases, probably worth to Google. Now let's move on to viruses. We definitely all have a background about viruses because of the beautiful truth that we're living. Yep, COVID-19. But remember when I said that's only a small percentage of bacteria that are bad? Yeah, things get different here because there isn't a good virus. All viruses are bad. But let's make something clear. Both bacteria and viruses have one thing in common, which is that they both have a genetic material, even though that viruses aren't actually living organisms. So apparently, before we start discussing the structure of a virus, let's just make this out from the beginning. There isn't really a typical structure for a virus because basically a virus is nothing but a non-living strand of genetic material within a protein code. That's what it's all about. So the main thing is that a virus is basically a genetic material, which is the DNA or RNA, they can be both, either DNA or RNA, within a protein coat, inside a protein coat which is called a capsid. That's it. It doesn't have organelles, it can't even move, nor can it even replicate by its own self. So that's the main thing in a virus, a genetic material and a protein coat, in other words, the capsid. If there's a tail or any other extra part of the virus, that's going to differ from a virus to the other. Because for sure, viruses have many shapes and many types, and we're just going to say some of them. So let's try to clarify what we just said. So what's in front of you is 4 types of viruses. Each type has its own shape. For example, tobacco-mosaic virus has a helical shape. Adenovirus has a polyhedral shape. Influenza virus has a spherical shape, and bacteriophage has a complex shape. So even though they all have different shapes, they all have one thing in common, which is the genetic material, either DNA or RNA, can be both. And the protein coating, which is around the genetic material, which is called the capsid. This capsid, as we just said, is made of protein, which makes viruses generally classified according to the type of nucleic acid that they contain. Now for the size of the virus, the virus can be from 5 nanometers to 300 nanometers, and actually a nanometer is 1 billionth of a meter. And as you can see in the picture, the difference between the size of the bacterium and the size of a bacteriophage or a HIV. We previously mentioned how bacteria can affect you. Now, how can virus infect you? Like, how does viral infection occur? So this one is different because the main thing is that a virus needs a host cell. So the virus attaches to the host cell using specific receptors on the plasma membrane of the host. Different types of organisms have receptors for different types of viruses. This means that not any virus can go affect. So the moment it successfully attaches to the host cell, one of two cycles take place, either the lytic cycle or the lysogenic cycle. Let's take bacteriophage as an example. This virus infects bacteria, and we're going to see the whole process right now. So since viruses cannot replicate by themselves, you want to know how this young fella replicates? Starting by the lytic cycle, this is our host cell, which is bacteria, and this is the bacteriophage. The virus attaches with the cell from specific receptors. It inserts the genetic material into the host cell, and the reason for all of this is that it wants to use the organelles inside the host cell in order to replicate itself. After it replicates, the cell explodes, and this is how the virus leaves. And then this happens. So basically, the lysogenic cycle has the exact same beginning as the lytic cycle, but instead of the gene replicating itself, the viral DNA becomes part of the bacterial chromosome. And then, within the cell division, which is the binary fission in this case, the viral DNA stays in the cell for a specific period of time, and then when it comes to a specific point, new viruses leave the host cell after the provirus leaves the bacterial chromosome. Now, for the final point that we're discussing today, we're going to mention some human viral diseases. So let's talk about some nervous system diseases like the polio and rabies. Example for childhood diseases is measles, and finally for the most common virus, the flu virus or the influenza, which is basically COVID-19's cousin, and the common cold, which are basically types of respiratory diseases. That's all for today's video. We have compared between viruses and bacteria through specific aspects. Thank you so much for your attention.